If you're analyzing sales data in Excel or sales growth rates and there's different components that are contributing to the total, what you might find useful is to use stack charts in Excel. In this example, I've got Starbucks' comparable sales numbers for the past couple of years, where we've got it broken down so we can see the impact of transactions and higher prices. So for the most recent quarter, there's a 3% decline in comparable sales. 2% was a positive impact in average ticket, but there was a minus 5% decline in the transactions. And so the idea being is that these values will add up to this. So we can see what effect each component had. Was the growth rate due to an increase in transactions or an increase in price, or vice versa? Now, in some cases, there's some rounding issues here. So we've got 5 and 4, but the global comparable sales is 10. But for the most part, we can use this as a way to analyze our data and see what the respective components were and how they contributed to the overall numbers. Like here, we can see that back in 2022 Q3, there's a 3% decline in transactions, but the average ticket was up 6% versus the previous year. So inflation had a big impact on that, leading to a positive overall comparable sales number, even though the transactions were down 3%. So let's plot this on a chart to make it easier to read. So I'm going to select my data here. I'm going to go to Insert, select Chart, and if I go to All Chart, there's a couple of different stack charts you can use. I mean, one of the more common ones is probably going to be a line chart where you've got a stacked line there. I find that a bit harder to read. The column chart, I think, is a lot easier. If we select a stacked column, you can see we've got that set up, and that's kind of how I want it to look, where we've got the different components of it. And I'm going to hit OK and put this in here. And actually, the one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this chart before I actually plot this, because the thing is, I do not want to be adding the transactions on top of the ticket price, because the idea being is these values should add up to this. But what I want to actually do is plot that comparable sales number, because in some cases it doesn't add up exactly right. So I'm going to right click and change the series chart type. If I go under the combo section, I can have the transactions and the average ticket as stacked values, but the global comparable sales, I do not want to add that. So I'm going to change that and make it just a simple X and Y scatter. I don't want to put it on a secondary axis, just everything all on one. And I'm going to hit OK. And so now I've got that in here. Now, with Excel, when you're stacking charts, it can look a little bit funny once you've got negatives, just because they're not going to add up properly. So I'm going to do away with the axis entirely. And what I'm also going to do is adjust this row here, because right now, because we've got negative values, it's hard to see this. So to make it a bit cleaner, I'm going to right click, format the axis, and down here under labels, I'm going to put it, instead of next to axis, I'm going to set it to low, and that puts it down here. So it's a lot easier to read now. Another thing that I like to do with these stack charts, or these column charts in general, is to shrink the white space in between them. To do that, again, I can format the data series, and I like to set the gap width to 50%. Just so there's less white space, it's a lot easier to see the values. So now it's a whole lot easier to compare our values, because we can see the orange piece is the average ticket component, the transactions are the blue one, and we've got our circles for the comparable sales. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit more by just changing some of the colors. So for example, here for the blue one for the transactions, I'm going to change that just to make it a green color. The other value, I'm going to make it lighter green. And what I'm going to do for the global comparable sales is I'm going to right click and add a data label here, because I want to show that actual percentage. And I'm going to format this just to make sure that it shows above my value. Now, one thing that you'll see here is, okay, that that it might be sometimes hard to read depending on the background of your other visuals. But one way to fix this is, if I select these labels, I can go under Format, and I can change the shape So I can just select any kind of outline, like a rectangular outline. And what I'm going to do here is change it so it's black and the font to white, and shrink this down a little bit. And now it's a lot easier to see. So regardless of where it is, I can see that comparable sales growth number. So even if it's on a dark background or a light one, it doesn't matter. I still see that easily. And so now we can see that, Q3 2024, Q2 2024, we can see both the chunks that the transactions represented in terms of growth versus the average ticket and the comparable sales number. Now, one thing you may want to do is right now I've got the most recent data on the left-hand side. You may prefer to have it on the right. So if you want to do that, you can right-click Format Axis and then put the categories in reverse order. By doing that, now we've got the most recent numbers on the right-hand side, and then we've got the oldest on the left. So now when we're analyzing this, it's a lot easier to see this. So because you see the average ticket, in 2022, when inflation was high, we saw that the average ticket was playing a much larger role in Starbucks' overall growth rate. But here in 2024, it's much smaller. And the average ticket is still positive 2%, but we see this negative transaction volume. And because we've got this axis here at 0, we can see that these were negative values over here. So minus 2%, minus 1%, minus 3%. That brings us back to Q3 2022, where there was minus 3% transaction growth, but positive 6% average ticket, resulting in an overall 3% global comparable sales number. So as you can see, it's a lot easier now to analyze this data because we can see that the light green portions, those relate to the average ticket, the price increases. And we can see the dark green relating to the transactions. And at the same time, we've got that overall global comparable sales number showing in our labels. So the only thing missing is to put a title, say Starbucks comparable sales growth. And so just like that, we've created a chart that, it's easy to read, shows us a lot of information in one visual, where we can see the different components, the overall growth rate, and, we can see the trending to see the different pieces. So by using a combo chart where we've got a stacked piece for the different components, and then using just a simple scatter for the overall value, we can have everything we need on one chart to analyze this.